Hello, and thank you for joining me for another episode of the Finish More Music podcast. I am delighted to be joined by none other than Mr. Josh Butler for this one, a man who the legendary Pete Tong said of one of the UK's premier house music talents. Super exciting. Huge fan of your music, Josh, as you know, and we're obviously very privileged recently to have you run a masterclass for us inside of the FMM community that was incredibly popular, where you broke down some of your tracks, discussed your workflow, and I'm super excited now to get more into your mindset around your influences, creativity, your past, and your future journey. So first of all, officially, thank you for joining us, and welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. What an intro.
There we go. It only gets better at the very, very beginning. I tell you, you wait till I record the big shebang at the start, because you've got so many amazing things that you've covered. So one of the things that I love to dig into right at the start is a day in the life of. Now, I won't use the word typical, because I think, there's obviously so many things that you do. You're gigging, touring, you've been in different countries and so on. But I guess a day in the studio life of you might be a good way to put it. What does that look like, from the waking up, any routines you've got, the amount of time you spend in the studio, let us be on your shoulder for a day, so to speak?
Yeah, no, of course. Yeah, I think the typical day, when I'm not touring, of course, I would be at home, wake up about 8, have some breakfast. Actually, no, I'm telling a lie already. I don't have breakfast till about 10 or 11. I just drink black coffee. I like to fast in the morning. So keep that going. And usually in the morning from 8 till about 11:30, I'm doing emails, listening to demos, maybe any mastering jobs that I've got, and keeping the label ticking. Generally, it's generally label work or stuff that my manager needs, any paperwork or tax affairs. That's always a big one. That's a time-consuming one. So that's usually the morning, and then I'll go to the gym at 11:30 for an hour or an hour and a half. Come home, and then it's almost like a fresh start. Then I'm in a different mindset. I've moved my body for an hour or so. I've done all the boring stuff in the morning, and then I can kind of get creative and settle into the studio, and ideally switch my phone off or put it onto airplane mode, so I'm not distracted. But that doesn't happen every day. I can be here on Instagram in one hand sometimes, and then making music with the other hand. But yeah, that's roughly how my day looks. And I'll do a few hours in the studio. Hopefully, you lose track of time. That's sort of the ideal goal for a studio session. I want a 4-hour session to feel like 30 minutes. So yeah, hopefully, by the end of a 4-hour session, I've got a track pretty much laid down or 90% ready. And then I'll switch it off for the evening usually, and just have tea or dinner, wherever you are in the world. Have some food, and then see some friends. I like to ride my bike in the evening with my mates, or go for a walk or something, and then reset. I used to spend all night in the studio actually, and would just work. But I find more and more these days that you can get diminishing returns if you just start tweaking the same loop for 12 hours. It's almost not healthy. You know what I mean? Totally. And you're just sort of reversing all the work, or you can be, not always obviously, but you can be reversing a lot of the vibe that you've created in that short space of time. It can kind of get lost in my experience.
So over a period of time, you've sort of kept an eye on how things are going, and finding an optimal way for you to work and be the most productive and creative in the studio.
Yeah, I think it can be easy to overproduce stuff with all the technology and all the equipment. But the basics, or the basis of this music, electronic, house and techno, is it was all made on pretty cheap equipment back in the day, and was meant to be raw and underproduced to a certain extent.
Yeah, totally. One of the things you said there that I'm really interested in is the idea of hopefully losing track of time, which is one of the the kind of markers, I guess you could say, of going into the elusive flow state, that idea where you're completely in the music and you're not overthinking, you're not perfecting, you're not getting distracted. You mentioned the phone. Is there anything that you do, in the lead up to it? So you mentioned obviously the physical exercise, being out of your studio and coming in. Are there any other routines or anything you do to get into that headspace?
Maybe smoke some weed.
Does that work for you?
Yeah.
Oh, it never used to work for me. I haven't had a smoke for a long time, but I always used to be like, find myself gravitating to the PlayStation. But that's interesting to hear.
See, I did buy a PlayStation during the lockdown because I felt like I'd exhausted all my music ideas, but then stopped using it. I ended up selling it a couple of months ago because I just didn't turn it on at all. I would much rather be on Ableton, even if I'm not gonna finish a track. I'd much prefer to be playing with a new piece of software, or that has always kind of been my PlayStation and my game, making music, because I started with Music 2000 on the PlayStation, and then I just evolved into things like Reason, Cubase, and loads of different DAWs over the years. But I find that I can, if I just take a few rips on a joint or a pipe, and just get lost in it, and been playing around with Pigments a lot recently. I don't know if you've used that.
Yes, yeah, Pigments. Yeah, great synth.
Great synth. Something like that is a good example where it's very complicated bit of software, really. So it takes time to get used to the workflow of it. So even if I'm not going to sit down to make a track, I'll just noodle around with a synth. You know what I mean?
So is there that again is interesting to me. Say, even if I'm not going to sit down and make a track, do you sense there's a mood in you tonight or this afternoon, for example, it's I'm going to sit down and write a track, or actually I'm not feeling that, so instead I'm going to do something else?
Yeah, exactly. It's very easy to just force the idea that I need to make a track and start to finish, or lay a few layers down, drums, bass, whatever. But you can force that all night, like I sort of alluded to before. You could spend 12 hours trying to force it, and sometimes you've just got to go with your own mood and let the creative flow just happen. That's kind of when you get lost, when you just sort of surrender to whatever's coming, the creativity, I guess. You surrender to the creativity, and rather than have a strict idea of what the outcome of the session is going to be, you just go with it. You might end up with a drum and bass tune. Who knows?
It's interesting, because that's something I wanted to ask you about, because I know from our conversations before, you've had a really wide range of inputs, from ambient all the way through to kind of hard house and drum and bass and all of those things. How do you feel that that's impacted your creativity in the music that you write?
I think it was everything, to be honest. The variety of my music taste has been everything to what my music style has become, my production style, I should say, because I spent a long time trying to fuse those two ends of the spectrum that you said. I was trying to fuse hard house with ambient and meet somewhere in the middle. And it took many years, but I think the one track that I felt, okay, I'm on the way to doing this, was No Frills Dub on Mad Tech many years ago now, probably nearly 10 years ago. And it had like the donkey type bass line of hard house, but it was used in a different way. And I tried to flip all the sounds on the head, you know what I mean? As well as creating sound environments and ambience in the back of what was essentially a tech house tune.
Love it. And so that's obviously helping you to craft, I guess, a unique path with the input that's coming in, which is the external muse. Then you mentioned, for example, Pigments. Is there anything else that you do to keep things fresh and experiment throughout the workflow of the creative process. Because one of the things that a lot of people get stuck with is they'll start writing quite a lot of music and then find that I guess they're maybe doing a little bit of Groundhog Day in working the same way all the time through every track and start to lose a bit of spark. And that's the other end of the spectrum with creative flow, is if you're bored, you're not likely to get into flow. And if you're overcomplicating it, bringing in too much stuff you can't handle with, you're not likely to get in there as well. So I wondered if there's sort of something else or other things that you do to experiment, whether it be technology or tutorials or anything that keeps things fresh for you.
I mean, these are all things that I still battle with weekly. You know, I haven't got this figured out. I'm just trying to articulate the times that work. So I've probably got a few different workflows, maybe 3, 4, 5 types of workflow where I can start a track in a different way. Over the past few days, maybe the past week or so, I've been focusing on getting ideas down quickly. So although I've got a studio with loads of hardware and nice synths and compressors and stuff, they've not really been on that much recently because it takes time. It can be really time consuming to get things sounding good with hardware or even just get it all synced up and working. So I've been focusing on quick ideas and using Ableton as the instrument, and even just using samples a lot of the time, putting loops into a simpler, for example, and taking slices out of a loop, or just anything, just not sitting still and really like keeping the pace going. But it's all in the box in Ableton, no frills really. And that goes back to that EP, actually, No Frills Dub. That was kind of the idea, stripped back, quick ideas. And I think that's where my inspiration is coming from at the moment. It's not always like that. Sometimes I'll be inspired by turning on one of my synths and just playing chords. And I've got this amazing, let me see if I can, is this going to be a video podcast?
Yes, it is. It is.
All right, let me see if I can show you this. I've got this Sherman filter bank. And if I'm ever bored, I turn this thing on and it just makes the most insane noises. So that's a great source of inspiration, you know, because you just never know what you're going to get. The unpredictability can be quite inspiring on that thing.
Love it. So there's stuff in the box, there's hardware things, there's just playing chords, so a musical start, and you're doing that until the mood takes you and you feel something. And then what's the next sort of part of the process when you feel, hang on, this has caught my ear and it's starting to take some sort of shape? What does the shape tend to look like, and then what are the steps after that for you?
So I guess if I've got a good loop down, say in the Ableton Live session, I'm feeling the groove and I've got some nice chords to create a mood, I'm then going to try and get an arrangement going. So I'll start removing, I actually listened to the Steve Bug podcast you did.
Right.
I was listening to that last night, and he mentioned simplifying the arrangement by just removing the kick or removing the hi-hat, the clap. And that is the next step, really. Once you've got the loop, I would just sit there and mute certain elements and think, oh, they sound good together. Or, you know, now this certain element is more prominent now that the hi-hat's gone, whatever it is, you know. So I'll just play around with different arrangements and try and get 4 or 5, 6 minutes of exploring the sounds. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. I love that. The idea of exploring the sounds as well, to see what they can do and the combinations, because I think one of the traps, particularly that people fall into early on, I suspect we've all been there, is the idea that, oh, where's this going? It must need something else and something else and something else. And instead of saying, well, I wonder what could be with the parts that I do have, the combinations, removing things, tweaking things, you know, how might that evolve or change over time?
Yeah, exactly. And so a good example could be something in the original loop is really quiet, but just flip it on its head and reverse it. So make that quiet thing the loudest thing at a certain point of the track. And little tricks like that is that's kind of how my arrangements come together, I think, because it can spark more ideas. You know, say that tiny quiet sound in the loop that's now really prominent, that might become a lead for the peak of the track, you know, and you could put more effects on that. And I think explore is probably the best word for it, you know, and just really try and open up that sound and see what you can do with it, you know, experiment, try and rip it apart, try and break it.
Yeah, I love that. It's a word that comes up quite a lot in the podcast from guests is the word destroy.
Yeah.
How could I destroy this thing and see where that goes? Yeah, it's a really common word that we hear. And then you mentioned like you'd at the end of 4 hours in a session where, you know, things are taken off, you've hopefully gone into flow at 4 hours, you've got an arrangement there. Is it days until you come back to it? When will you come back to kind of refine it? Do you always refine these ideas, or do you sometimes come back and have one of those, you know, what was I thinking moments?
Yeah, I mean, they happen a lot still. But there's no right answer, to be honest. I think it will all depend on how busy I am the next few days. If I've got the time, I'd like to open up the project again and see if it still sounds any good. Other times I could be really busy for the next 3-4 days, so I won't even look at Ableton. And that can also be a good thing, you know, because you completely forget what it sounds like. You come back with a completely fresh pair of ears, fresh perspective, and usually they're the times when you finish music, you know. Sometimes you finish it in the same session, of course, but yeah, I find a separate session, probably another 2 or 3 hours of just tweaking the mix, or anything that sticks out, maybe shorten the arrangement or just generally change a few things around in the second session. And hopefully that'll be it. You know, if I'm going back to it 3 or 4 times, sometimes there's an issue there, you know, like I recently did a track called Sinking, and it's taken me 6 months to finish, man. And I'm so sick of it now. I love it, don't get me wrong, but I'm like so happy that it's at a point where I can sort of draw a line under it and sleep at night.
Was there one thing about it that you couldn't put your finger on that eventually you had the light bulb moment? Because obviously it was something about it you loved, and there was something in there, and I'm sure if you were really consciously aware of it, you might have been able to fix it more quickly. But was there a thing about it that you were like, it's that?
Yeah. And it took me ages to figure it out. But it's actually quite a common problem. It was the kick drum. So I think if you've got the wrong kick drum, you can literally spend 6 months tweaking a mix, trying to make it work. And then as soon as you find the right kick sample, it falls into place. You know, it's very frustrating. It's part of the process.
And this leads really nicely actually into the idea of you talking about, you know, sometimes you're being busy, and also this idea of finalizing the track. So one of the things you're obviously busy with is, you know, getting back to it now, particularly is DJing and touring and all of those things. A track like this one that took 6 months, did you fix that kick drum, or was it such a big issue that you knew it in the studio, or is it something that you played out and it became glaringly obvious? What's the kind of feedback loop there with tracks going out into the world and then you figuring something out about them when you're playing them and bringing that back into the studio?
Yeah, I mean, with this case, with Sinking, I didn't actually play it out, and I still haven't played it out because it's I want to say it's more of a pop record, actually. It's got a big vocal on it, and it sits in a weird space, actually, somewhere in between like Afro house and pop, as well as my usual style. So I haven't actually played it out because the moment's not been right, but that's just a piece of music that's where I just trusted the track, you know, I was alluded to at the beginning, where you just got to go with it. That was one of those. I don't know what I'm going to do with it, where it's going to live, but it needs to be finished. But to go back to your question, with more club tracks, for sure, it's really important actually to play them out. And and hear it in the right environment, feel the bass, the weight of the bass, the clarity of the bottom end, and the balance of everything in general. Really, it's so important. So that's happened a few times, yeah. More so over the past, like pre-COVID, I was doing that because I was DJing a lot more, and I feel like that I was just in a much better momentum then. But I did do it. Played in Basel a couple of weeks ago in Switzerland with Pausa, and I've just signed a record to Solid Grooves. So I played it out when Pausa was there, and we both sort of analysed it and made sure that the mix was all good in the club before the release. Basically, luckily it was.
Yeah, fantastic.
But that was one of those tracks that the Solid Grooves track was a good example. And sort of a reminder for me that I just finished this 6 months long project. And then I did this one for Solid Grooves in a day, and it got signed in a few days. So it's like the amount of time you put into a track doesn't necessarily determine the outcome.
Yeah, totally. With the obvious sort of listening for the mix and, different elements in the track when you're playing it in a club, what about sort of crowd reactions? Is that anything that when you play it, you come back in the studio and think, oh, I'll change the arrangement in some way, or, even maybe the intro, outro, depending how you mix the track into other records?
Absolutely. So I think my Carl Cox remix is a good example of this, because originally it didn't have that long breakdown. It just had probably 30 seconds of a breakdown, similar vibe, but it really, really worked in the club, that 30-second breakdown. And I thought, you know what, this could easily be extended. It could be doubled in time. So yeah, just duplicated that breakdown and smoothed things over a bit more. And it just creates a lot more tension. And then when it drops, it works every time. So that is a really important point, actually. Arrangement is a big one for sort of crowd interaction and crowd psychology, I guess, is the word I'm looking for.
I like that. Crowd psychology. Yeah. So everyone knows now when they're on the dance floor, they're being analysed by you. Dr. Butler's got his eyes on you. Be careful.
It's all about that tension release, though, isn't it? And arrangement is everything in that.
Yeah, totally. So one of the other things that I'm keen to explore that I think links into this and getting your music out into the world is really development, not just from a creative standpoint, but also over the period of time you've been writing music from a skills perspective as well. And of course, some of that is creativity and the workflows you use and all of those things, but other things will be production skills and mix down, sonic improvements, and so on. And a lot of what we learn is by doing. And that's one of the big things I'm a proponent of, finishing lots of music, being prolific and learning by doing. There is also a path of that around identifying skills and gaps that you might have to work on. So I think you mentioned previously you did a music technology course, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. I'd love to sort of know how that came about, what made you decide to go for it, and what impact it had overall doing it compared to the things that you learned just by doing it on your own, I guess.
My answer is quite a bit different to most people's, I think, because a lot of people have done technology courses and production courses, but basically, for those who don't know, I grew up in New Zealand, and over there isn't, or especially at the time, there wasn't really much of a music scene, especially for house music. There's a lot of drum and bass over there. But yeah, there wasn't really much house music, and there wasn't really much music education or an industry, really. The industry is very small. So I knew that if I wanted to get into music, which I really, really did, I would probably have to come back to the UK, where I was born. I just went to school over there. So, you're approaching the end of high school and you're starting to think, what are you going to do with your life? And my main choice was to come back here and start college and do music, because I knew that there was more of a chance of me actually getting involved with the industry if I came over here. So that's probably the first part of the question. That's the reason I did it. in terms of production, I was already teaching myself everything, basically. I got to college and the tutors were almost like, you don't need to be here, you know it all. So they were very, very impressed, to say the least. And we're still really close now, me and the tutors at that college. They did a hell of a lot for me, because they could see I had a talent, and they really pushed me to go on and do what I'm doing now. So I didn't actually learn that much in terms of music production. However, we did a lot of things like sound for film and radio shows, and learning how studios are configured and wired up. So that side of it, the actual science and technical side of it, I did learn stuff for sure. And then a similar story at university as well, because I went on and studied an undergraduate degree in music technology, which is a science degree rather than like an arts degree. So it wasn't really like creative or making music as such. It was more like building synthesizers and acoustics.
Right.
Yeah. So in terms of my career, I did get things out of it in terms of like building studios and knowing the electronic side of it a little bit. I'm no expert, but it's definitely helped in that regard. But I think the main thing I got out of studying was going out, mate, and partying, basically, and and networking. You know what I
Being
mean?
in the scene. It's really interesting because I also did a music technology course as well. It was mainly around music production and sound engineering. And similar to you, I turned up to it and already knew a great deal of what was being taught. However, I also learned all of the miking up of the drum kits, all of that stuff, a lot of those things, a lot of the stuff to do with signal flow and things like that, which has helped me to understand, so for example, like Ableton, to think, because you've got the interface of Ableton, the bit you see, and then you've got what's really going on in the background, all the connections, where files are, how things are routed.
Yeah.
And I think it really helped almost with an X-ray vision of understanding the software. And then the other thing was mixing down everything from one person with an acoustic guitar to rock bands to electronic music. And I think there's always, even if it's the same thing you're learning, when you see it through different lenses and perspectives, it sometimes lands differently, or it sticks more, or you make other connections. So whilst I'd say there was a big chunk of it that perhaps was, you would maybe argue, money down the toilet from the point of view that I was sitting there listening to stuff I knew already, there were some add-ons on it that were useful to carry forward. And yes, I met people and partied and had a great time in London and all of that stuff as well. So it's really interesting to kind of hear the parallels with that. So you had that, you've learned most of your music production skills by doing. Is there anything else you do to sort of level up your skills?
Collaborations, I guess, is the first thing that comes to mind. Once you start getting to know other producers, and especially in Leeds where I was, there was just such an amazing community for dance music, that you just go around to people's houses or invite them around to my place, and we'd just make music and we'd learn off each other. I think I always, even now, take something away from a studio session, because even if it's just a keyboard shortcut or the way someone works, there's always something to pick up. So that was a big part of it, I think, just collaborating and, again, meeting people. It's all about connections and making friends with the same interests, really.
Agreed. It's a big part of what we do in FMM is collaborations. We make sure we plug them into the calendar, and we give people different challenges to stretch them creatively, pair them up with new people, sometimes cross genre, sometimes same genre. And it is the same thing. It's what you learn as it is. The amazing thing is often people go into it who are a little bit nervous, they haven't done it before, or don't feel their production chops are quite there. And then they come out with some kick-ass pieces of music, which is great. And everyone's lit up. But the real level, thing that's important is the leveling up of the skill set. And as you say, I never thought of doing that, or that plugin does that, or that, it only takes one or two things and it can have a dramatic impact. So along the way, at what point did you feel, right, okay, I'm ready to start getting my tunes out there? When did that happen? Was there something that told you? How did it all come about, like the first releases?
First release, which was actually under Josh Butler, but it was trance. And I would have been like 17 then. So I was on that college course. I hadn't gone to university at this point. And I used to do a lot of stuff on MSN. We had because I was involved with the trance community and hard house at the beginning. That was the kind of where I cut my teeth. We used to have lists of people on MSN. We'd just sit there all night chatting and send tunes over. And I got chatting to a guy called Matt Dawson, who signed one of my first records to a label called Encore. Signed three trance tunes. And that was that, really. That was the first release that gave me a bit of a taste for it. It never did anything. It never made me any money. Nobody ever listened to it, really. But I had a contract, and my tunes are on the internet. So I was like, yes, I'm getting somewhere. And then it just went from there, really. I went further into the hard house scene rather than trance, because that was a big thing in Leeds as well. I had a really good crew of hard house people. So I started DJing at hard house nights and releasing on slightly bigger labels, getting to know some of the Tidy Tracks crew. And then, I feel like I just hit the ceiling with that music, and I was also quite young compared to everybody else in the scene. So I was like, shit, I want to do this as a career. Maybe I need to start making more different genres as well. And I'd always experimented with making other stuff, but I put a lot more time into the house music because I could obviously see that there was a big scene brewing. It was just before everything really boomed with house music. So, started producing at a good time, really. And then it's same again. I've got a record signed to a smallish label, and then it grew. I got something signed to Off Recordings, and then MTA with Got a Feeling. And that's when things really stepped up, but it was just all baby steps, man. Over the course of maybe 5 years, 6 years or so of just getting to know people and getting to realize how music is released.
Did you have it mapped and planned out? Because obviously that you've mentioned the conscious decision to go from the banging Hoovers, have some of that across to the house music. Did you have I want this label, that label, this label? How did it unfold? Not at all.
No. There was no plan. It was just again, just making music that I loved. And as I mentioned in the first part, I was kind of on a mission to find the middle point, the meeting ground for hard house and reggae almost. And where the tempos meet is kind of house tempo. And I was taking a lot of the effects from dub reggae, like the echoes and the reverbs, but also the donks and the Hoovers from hard house and just slamming it all together.
That's fantastic. I love it. So I was curious as to whether there'd been anything you'd done particularly in order to capture the essence of the genre of house, because there are obviously some clear characteristics that are very different from just the straight up in your face, rigid, smack you around the head as hard as we can hard house. So I used to have loads of hard house records. I used to DJ it as well. And there are obviously different nuances and things like that. Is that something you studied, or this came about as a result of you saying, I like this piece and this piece from here, and just making those creative connections?
Yeah, it was exactly that, creative connections. Yeah, and just seeing it as a puzzle in a way, how can I fuse these two completely opposite genres and meet them in the middle? And I was always into the funkier hard house as well. I don't know if you remember Untidy.
Yes.
So it was a slightly slower and more funky and lots of disco samples. I really loved all that. So that was quite an easy transition, really, into some of my early house records.
And so then we come to the label, Origins.
Yeah.
Tell me about it. What sparked the inspiration in your mind? And I want to kickstart my own label and take that on.
Yeah, it was a big step. And it took me a while, actually. I could see everybody around me starting labels, and I was always a bit apprehensive, thinking, is it really necessary for another label? But the way things were going, the people I was meeting, I got really close with Marshall Jefferson for a few years. It turned out he lives in Prestwich in Manchester, or he was at the time anyway. So me and Marshall started hanging out every week. We'd go to Pizza Express for 2-for-1 pizzas and just talk about, like, he'd just tell me stories, mate, about the roots of house music and crazy stories about Trax Records and the guy who owned that. He has told it online, so if anybody's interested, go and watch the Marshall Jefferson podcast, because there's some very insightful stories from back in the late 70s, early 80s. So yeah, Marshall was a key inspiration for Origins. I was also getting quite close with Kerry. Me and Kerry Chandler played in what's it called now? It's a club in Paris. I want to say Chalet, but it's not. Chalet's in Berlin. I've been to too many nightclubs, man. I can't remember the names.
I think the damage was done at the Hard House nights at the beginning. It's rolling through. It's catching up with you.
Anyway, me and Kerry got really, really close. And we're talking weekly. And then Todd, I just started bumping into all these guys on the road, and we obviously had a lot in common. They wanted to work with me. I wanted to work with them. So the idea for Origins came about to kind of celebrate the roots of house music. And the original idea was to bridge the gap between generations of, that those guys are obviously 10, maybe 20 years older than me. So my crowd was a bit younger than me. So it was about trying to introduce my younger crowd to these originators who they might not necessarily have heard of at the time. So it was all about kind of celebrating Chicago and the early days, really.
And you've gone from strength to strength with it as well. I mean, the releases are absolutely superb. In fact, we've got Nick Joseph. You've put out a record.
Yeah.
One of our members as well. How did that come about?
From Chicago, right?
How did that come about? Yes. How did that come about?
I think Nick just sent me a demo, actually. I can't remember 100%, but I'm pretty sure Nick just dropped a link in my inbox, and it was a good tune. So it was as simple as that, really.
And that was it. And I mean, that brings us to a question that's on so many people's lips, which is like, how do I get my music heard by label owners? I mean, I imagine you receive a fair old load of demos coming through, and you mentioned at the top of the show about your routine, and the first thing you do in the morning is emails and things. When and how do you listen to demos? What's the best way to get music into your hands?
I don't listen to them as much as I should, but as I've sort of alluded to, I have taken a bit of a step back with some music stuff, where I just tried to do normal things with my life rather than just sit and listen to demos all day. Because seriously, no joke, I could sit and listen to them back to back for weeks on end and still not be at the end of the inbox. So it is very difficult to get them heard. And I kind of wish it wasn't that way. I wish I could listen to everything, but yeah, it's not possible sometimes. So, I think in Nick's case, we had a couple of mutual friends. He also came to my show in Chicago. So we sort of had a face-to-face connection as well. That always helps. If you can get in front of your favorite DJ and give them a USB, or just say, hello, I sent you a link last week, can you get back to me when you get some time? That always gives you an edge for sure, because, my demo inbox is full of all sorts of shit, not just house music, like trip hop and you name it, mate, EDM. It's just not the right sound. People just send out mass demos, and that kind of gets in the way of the really dedicated, talented people that are tuned in with the Origin sound, and want to be part of the crew. So I think if you can get to a show face to face, connection is always going to give you an advantage.
Yeah, totally. And that it will always be the frustration, and we all get spammed, senseless with stuff, just people senselessly doing it on, social media. And I get loads of messages all the time, just constantly like coming at me with random stuff. And if you're known or seen in a way, that just multiplies. And so you, known, seen, and with a record label, must be absolutely under the hammer with stuff at the moment. Demos we've talked about. Is there anything else that, as the label owner, you find is quite a challenging aspect of owning a label? And I'm asking that because, again, people sort of have their eyes on, it seems like a really attractive, exciting thing to do, and there's lots of pros. In reality, is there anything else that you find to be quite challenging with running the label?
I mean, in terms of A&R, I guess it's about finding tracks that you think are trendy to a certain extent and that will sell for what's popular, but also I want something cutting edge as well, and I don't just want to release the same track that's essentially the same sounds that have just been rearranged as what was out last week. I get sent a lot of that. So one of the main challenges is finding something that is new and forward thinking, but also still rooted in our sound and my sound. And, it's a balancing act, I think. It's a difficult one. It's the same with producing, mate. Even when I'm producing, I'm still trying to push the sound forward, but obviously keep it within what I've done before. I don't want to lose fans because they're like, well, what's he doing now? He's making like ambient music or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. I mean, this is going to actually move us to something else that I wanted to talk about, which is aliases and the new alias that you created. Before we do, though, I know that in the label you've got something going on with some T-shirts that it would be good for us to talk about. So tell me more.
For sure. Well, that goes back to the launch of the label when we did the Heroes of House series with Kerry, and Todd, and Marshall, Robert Owens. We had these amazing pieces of artwork done of like cartoon characters, superhero characters of the guys like Kerry and that. So I just thought, the label's 7 years in now, I think. So I just wanted to sort of bring those bits of artwork to life again, because they were only ever used on the covers of the EPs. So I wanted something that I could hold, or wear. So yeah, we had it printed on T-shirts, and we're donating some of the profits to the Mind charity.
Amazing.
They're available on my Bandcamp. So they've been, we've done 2 so far. We've done my one and Kerry's, and they've been going for a couple of months.
Brilliant stuff. Do you have the URL off the top of your head for that? Don't worry, we'll put it in the show notes. It's all right. Whenever people ask me for URLs of things, I'm like, so we'll get it. I guess
if you just search my name and Bandcamp, it'll come up.
Yes, easy enough. Easy enough. Yeah. We'll get a hot link in the show notes as well. Okay, brilliant stuff. So let's go back to that alias thing, because I think it's a really interesting link between, okay, these are my fans, and I want to write the music that people know me for, or what's authentic about me and my journey and the label, plus be cutting edge. And then, as you mentioned, there's also sometimes a desire in you to maybe write a different style of music, and an alias is a great way of doing that. So let's talk about Denton, the alias. What inspired you, and what can people expect from that style of music and that artist moniker?
Absolutely. So I toyed with the ideas for years of having aliases, but never wanted to remove too much energy from what I was doing with Josh Butler. So during the lockdown, obviously I had a lot more time on my hands, and I started contacting singers to do collaborations. And I already had probably 2 or 3 more song-based house tracks there, with singers, full verses and chorus and stuff. So I sort of built on that sound, because they were too commercial sounding for what I was doing with Josh Butler. But it's still very much house music. So I sort of built on that style. I worked with Lauren Lamont for the first one, and Danny Howard loved it. So he picked it up, and Danny's been instrumental in Denton, really, because he's signed every track apart from one to date. So he's been right behind it. He's been supporting it all on Radio 1. And I guess it suits his style a bit because it's all original vocals, more radio-friendly music, really. And I've always loved it, you know. I think even if you listen to Feels Good on Defected, that was kind of creeping into the Denton side of it. Even a lot my other Defected stuff as well is kind of always been that more song-based and big soulful vocals and stuff. So I've always been really passionate about that. But I felt for the real songs, they needed a different name. It would be too confusing for me to release, like, for example, my Rejected one that's out at the end of this month is very stripped back and very trippy and druggy sounding. So for me then to release something that's like Drive Time Radio 1 style, it's just miles apart. So it felt like the right time to do it.
Is there any secret behind the name Denton, why you chose that? It's interesting. One of the questions that comes up quite a lot in the community, and say quite a lot, we've had it a few times, is I'm trying to figure out what my artist name is. You know, what should I come up with, kind of thing. Is there any secret behind Denton?
Yeah, well, I did wonder what to call it for ages. People always say I look a bit like Seth Rogen. So I thought I'd play on that. And his character in Pineapple Express was called Dale Denton. So I was like, right, I'm having that.
Love it. Brilliant stuff. Yeah, abstract, but connected somehow by a thread. Yeah. I like it. That's absolutely superb. One of the things you just said that really pricked my ears up was you were waiting for a time potentially to launch your alias because you didn't want to remove too much energy from Josh Butler. And I think this is interesting because people often do play around with the idea of aliases. How are you managing that? How are you managing the two different sounds, the two outputs now? Is there two streams of potentially marketing, social media, networking? How is that all playing out?
Yeah, well, you know, at first I wanted it to be a completely anonymous project with no Instagram or no social media. But, you know, understandably, Danny was like, we're going to need you to make an Instagram, really, at least. We need to promote it online. So, there is a loose strategy with Denton, but it's not, you know, I don't stress about it too much. It is pretty much just a production alias for me. And if the song is good, I kind of just let it grow organically. I don't really even go on or post that much unless there's a record out. Try not to worry about the social media for Denton too much because it is a lot of energy to run one artist name, never mind two or three.
And is this the case of going back again to your creative process where you sit down and start writing a track? You mentioned obviously that Denton has the vocals in it. So are you writing a track and seeing where it goes and you go, actually, you know what, this one is starting to go in the Denton direction, we'll add vocals to it? Or are you purposefully getting vocals done early on? How does that work?
This is an example of another workflow, really, or two workflows, where sometimes I could start a track and think this sounds a bit more radio friendly, and I've got a certain vocalist in mind, and then I'll send it to some friends who sing and songwrite. Or they would send me acapellas or maybe a really rough demo. That happened with the last one, actually, with Somi, where she sent me a few ideas and it was all really, really basic production, but there was a good vocal hook. So I just started to build on that idea, really, and write some more music around it.
And are there any tracks that have been sort of sitting on the hard drive that didn't fit the Josh Butler sound that you're now like, actually, you know what, that's the seed of a Denton track?
Oh yeah, mate. that was kind of part of the reason for starting Denton, is because I had these songs that didn't fit Josh Butler. So yeah, the next one that all goes to plan, we're just trying to clear one of the samples at the moment. That is that's like 8 years old now, I think.
Wow.
And the reason I didn't release it at the time is because the sample did put a few labels off. It's an Earth, Wind and Fire sample. That's the Rhodes piano, but we've since had it replayed, and yeah, I'm happy enough to release it now. I had it replayed back in the day to try and work around the sample clearance, but the replay just didn't do it for me. And I thought, it sounded so good with the original sample. I needed it to live like that at the time. But now I got this new Rhodes player, new keyboard player to do it, and it sounds fucking great. So that all goes to plan. That should be coming out on Danny Howard's label in a couple of months.
Wicked stuff. Yeah, and it's fascinating that what I'm hearing with the Alias is there's a combination of things. With the timing, it's like there's a bunch of music that's sitting there now, so I've almost got a back catalogue of things that gives me a run up at this. Skills are there. Everything is, I've got my processes, I've got everything locked down, so that now is the time that I can launch this without having any or minimal negative impact on what I was doing before.
Yes.
As opposed to someone who just goes, oh, that would be a good idea, and off they go over there, and it has the potential to unravel quite quickly by piling up quite the workload.
Yeah, you don't want to take on too much work too soon. The pandemic was a great opportunity for that sort of stuff, really, because you could just take on twice as much, and it was just good. It was just a good outlet, really, for me to think in different ways and produce music slightly differently, and just get into that flow state again, really.
Awesome. So last-ish question. I ask everybody this. It's the stick you straight under the bus question, because it's the big one. It's the, if you were to give somebody who's just starting out on the road of wanting to write music and get it released, one piece of killer advice, or even a time machine back to a even more fresh-faced than you are now, Josh Butler, and give yourself a piece of advice, what would it be?
It's a tricky one at this stage to give this advice, because the game has changed a lot in the last 10 years. Social media is so prominent now and so important, where it wasn't really when I started, thank God, because I hate social media. But I guess that would have to be one of the bits of advice. Take care of the necessary evil and build some followers. Unfortunately, it's become a lot more of a numbers game, and promoters and labels do look at numbers. In fact, not all labels, we don't at Origins, but I have had my distributors onto me saying, be careful who you sign in. We need to make sure you're selling certain numbers and that they've already got an audience, and some of them have got tour dates. I'm like, come on. I didn't get into it for numbers. I got into it for music. So part of me is a bit reluctant to all that. However, it is important. So if you can build an audience online, as well as building your production skills, get it going from the beginning, really.
It's really interesting that you say that, because everyone that I've spoken to owns a label. We don't look at the numbers, although of course there's the balance between established artists often and bringing up and comers in, and they're like, when we're just more fussed about the quality of the music. And I guess particularly with social media, you can fudge the numbers as well. There's sort of all sorts of things that you can do. But to hear that a distributor has sort of said to you, passing that down the line, we need the numbers and start looking at this, that's interesting. That's a really interesting piece of information.
Yeah, it was a little bit worrying when they told me that, actually, but it is what it is. And I think with smaller labels like Origins, they do understand that the reasons that we do it, and we're not Defected, or we're not a major label. We don't make much money at all with Origins. It is purely to give artists platforms, and for me to have quality unreleased music for my sets as well, that they're the main reasons to do it. And yeah, the numbers do come into it with bigger labels. So like I said, I think that is part of my advice, is to try and build your online numbers somehow. But other advice is to make sure your tracks sound good before you're sending them to labels. Make sure you're confident in what you're producing, because those trance tunes that I mentioned before, I had to get them taken off Beatport at some point because I was like, people can't hear this.
See, I think it's interesting because I imagine, for me anyway, if I'd have heard them and then listened to where you are now, I would just be thinking, wow, massive credit to you.
Yeah, fair play. I think they're taken off anyway. I'm pretty sure they're taken
well,
off.
Everyone's going to have a look now. Is that a different artist name though?
No, it was actually the same name. It was Josh Butler. Yeah, but they're not the worst things in the world. But going back to the demos, I do get sent some pretty average stuff. So you kind of don't want to tarnish your name and your reputation before you've really got going. Just be patient with it, and yeah, don't rush it. Make as much music as possible, and try and get people to play them as well. Play them in clubs, even if it's just your mates. Small club night with some friends. Play it in a club and hear it on a big sound system, and try and hone your skills enough to make it sound good on a big sound system.
Yeah, that's great advice. And obviously, if it's in a mix as well, it's going to compare to what goes before and after it, which will shine a light on anything that's majorly amiss.
Totally.
Absolutely superb. Well, look, been amazing talking to you. So much advice and just great insights. What can we expect from you coming up? What's on the radar? Where can people see you playing? We obviously got the tracks coming out, Denton tracks. I imagine there's more Josh Butler magic coming out as well.
Yeah, so I've got that sort of stripped back minimal type one I mentioned. That's on Rejected at the end of April. I love working on Rejected, because I always get to experiment a little bit. And this one is very different to what I've released in the past. So I'm pretty excited for that one. Obviously more Denton stuff, like you said. And then gigs, I have Leeds this weekend. Nearly said next weekend. Don't get that date wrong.
Where is he?
So I'm playing at Mint Warehouse this weekend. There's a few London shows in the pipeline as well. And then it sounds like there's going to be a big US tour over summer between like mid-July and going into mid-August.
Well, I might see you there then, because I think we've already told you, but Mrs. M and I are up in Sticks. We'll be in Austin by then. That will be our new home.
Good for you.
If you're playing anywhere local, we'll have to come out.
Yeah, I hope so. It'll do. Is that in Austin? Or that's Dallas, isn't it?
I think so, yeah. Yes,
I think Dallas.
Think it is.
Yeah, that's a great club in Texas, though. But there's a good scene down there, man.
Yeah, totally. So, yeah, if you're in the area, we'll keep an eye out and we'll come and say hello and have a bit of a night out.
We could have to go for dinner or something.
Yeah, totally. Fantastic. Josh, really appreciate you jumping on to the show, buddy. I knew you wouldn't disappoint because you've always got so much amazing stuff to share. And there was just so many good points in this, everything, talking all about the flow state and how you think about your music all the way through into the music business side and advice on that front. It's been end to end. It's been absolutely fantastic. So thank you very much.
Thanks, mate.
Awesome stuff. Until next time, take care.
You too. See ya.